What you got, Bear? Naruto! Wrong game.
Join the team.
Hey, this is the McGuire Review. Today we're going to be taking a look at Naruto Shippuden, the board game. Now, this is a very popular anime that's out there. Probably a lot of you know what Naruto is, but this is the actual board game. And it is from Yoka Board Games. And Yoka isn't one that we've taken a look at in the past, but I do have Naruto, this game here, as well as another game that has kind of a dragon theme that we're going to be taking a look at right after this, because I think they've done a fantastic job with these two particular titles. And I'm actually really excited about this publisher because they did such a great job with Naruto here. And what we're going to do today is just kind of go through some of these components, and I want to go through what the overall gameplay is going to look like, because I think they did a really good job with kind of your classic board management cooperative board game, because that's exactly what this is. It is a co-op game. You can solo this as well. It's a great solo experience. I've played this solo, and I've played this with a group of 4. You can max this game out with 5. Let's look at some of the stats here. We got 2 to 5 players. They do list 2 because it is at heart a true cooperative game, but you can definitely solo this game. And you'll kind of see that as it plays out when we take a look at some of the mechanics. We got 14 plus on it, but I'll tell you, this game is very simple from a mechanics perspective. And then 60 minutes. Now, I don't know that, I will say that the 60-minute time frame doesn't feel as accurate because it did take us quite a while to, work through this game, and we did beat the game, which was a big win. Because it is a struggle through this game. You're constantly struggling with trying to manage what's happening on the board, the cards that are in your hand. Every character is a little bit different in the way that they interact. And you're trying to kind of find those synergies between each one of the characters in using that hand card management to be able to defeat the board. And it's not easy because you're trying to move around, and there's various traps you're going to run into, and monsters you're going to have to fight, and then there's some big bad guys at the very end that you're going to have to defeat. And that will really be driven on how many rounds throughout the game you win. Is if you'll win a lot of rounds, you have a better chance of defeating the final bosses. But not saying that you couldn't play a horrible game and still be able to defeat the bosses for the big epic win. And I think that's what makes this game a lot of fun, is it really comes down to those last 2 bosses that you're going to battle. And the game offers a way to really change up the difficulty level of the game. So you will have the ability to change the difficulty of the final bosses. You have the ability to change the difficulty of the traps that you run into. Here's traps right here. We'll get to that in a second. There are 2 different kinds to give you the ease of changing that difficulty. You can change how many rounds you take to be able to fight each one of your encounters. There's just a multitude of things you can, change within the game to make it a little bit easier or to make it a little bit harder. And I like that they give you so many different aspects of the game that you can tweak on that scale. And it really can home in for any party the difficulty that's right. Because a lot of games will give you that, hey, if you want to make it a little bit easier, do this. If you want to make it a little bit harder, do this. And it doesn't always affect the game like you think that it would. It doesn't give you as much swing as it probably could. This game offers that, I would say, to the extreme level, where it does give you that kind of ability to zero in and customize the complexity of the game with any group playing. So 2 thumbs way up for the design on that, because I think they did a great job with it. So let's hit the components, and then I want to hit the gameplay, because the gameplay is very simple, but it offers a lot of different strategic discussions and options when it's the player's turn, and we'll get into how the mechanic of the actions work amongst the players. So I think that was very well done with a cooperative game. I think they've done that very, very well in comparison to other games that would be somewhat similar to this. So let's just start right here, and we'll loop around the table. So there are, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and hit the figures here first. There is a figure that represents kind of the final evil or bad guy that you're kind of chasing around that you will fight there at the end, and he will start here on this little number 1. There's various numbers on Bear. Why don't you go ahead and load up the video? We can see the board up close. There's various numbers on these locations, and not all of them. You'll see that on some of the larger ones that are kind of more artistically filled in, you'll see a number. And that number just indicates how that bad guy is from round to round going to kind of travel around the board. So that's really what this model is going to represent. It's going to move around the board and represent just where that current battle is taking place. And you'll want to get to that because you only have so many rounds until he'll move on. And if he's able to move on without defeating, the cards that are put out for that round, you'll then lose one of those rounds. And that does make a difference at the end of the game. We talked a little bit about the more rounds that you win as you're playing, when you battle these final bosses, that will either help you or hurt you. It will make, their defense less or more, their health less or more. That will affect this final battle. So you do want to win as many matches as possible. That is important. Don't just forget about that and casually go through and we lost, who cares? It just matters on the final boss, because if you beat the final boss, you win the game. It doesn't really matter how many of these you win or lose. You could win all 9 rounds and lose on the final boss, and you've lost the game. So there is a balance there, and I like that build-up of how that really defines, that final battle. So that's what this model's for. I probably will paint these up, and then the rest of the ones you're going to see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters that are included in the game, and there is a card for each one of those characters here. So let's go ahead and take a look at these cards. And I said we'd loop around, but I think I'm just going to kind of talk through this. We're going to hit the components as they come up. So on the fly, change there. Sorry about that. All right, so if we look at these characters, I'll probably paint these as well. Let's look at the miniatures. They do have some pretty good detail to them. I mean, they're not overly detailed. They're just to represent kind of where the characters are on the map as they sort of move around. They didn't even need to use these little miniatures if they didn't want to. They could just use simple tokens like they did for some of the familiars and various different beasts that you'll be battling as they come out on the board, but they did choose to go with the miniature, and I'm glad they did. I like it whenever they put kind of a miniature to represent the characters, and they did put quite a bit of detail that reflects from the anime, and they're very well done. And they're a good size as well. Not too big, not too small. So here's the cards that we've got here, and each one of these cards are double-sided. One side is more of the kind of normal standard play, and it will list off a little experience track here at the bottom, and that will give us the ability to kind of level up as we're playing the game, and we'll track that. And as they hit certain areas along that experience track, and there's just 2 points. 1 point in the beginning here will give them a little extra something, and then at the very end they'll get a little extra something. And I believe each one of the characters on their experience bar will get something. Yes, every single one of the characters will at least get 1 buff as they experience and they gain experience and they level up. Now on the other side of this card, and here's yet another variation that's built into another component that you can modify the difficulty of the game. So face B here doesn't have that experience, and it kind of sets a lot of your various different abilities here that are indicated around the side of the card just at a standard value, and it's usually a little higher than it would be on the other side. So in using this one, for example, we can see that this character has 3 fight, which means they're going to be able to roll 3 fight dice when it's their turn, and they're going to attack. They can roll 3. Now those fight dice can be modified by technique cards. We'll get to those in a second that each character is going to have, and those are custom for each one of the characters. There's 14 of them. And then you've got a chakra, I like to call it, the chakra value here, which is 3. And that's going to affect being able to use these technique cards. Generally, you have to spend that to be able to use these technique cards. Some of them come at a 0 cost, but those are far and few between. Most of them do come where you got to use at least one of that or more to be able to execute one of your technique cards. And then the bottom one here is how many cards at a time you can hold in your hand. And that's different for each character. Most of them are 3. I believe one of them is 4. Yes, it's this character right here, Nara, is 4. He will get to hold 4 technique cards in his hand at one time. The rest of the characters all can only hold 3. Well, outside of Hataki? Outside of Hataki here, he can hold 4 as well. So these 2 characters can hold 4 technique cards. The rest of them can hold 3. And that's how a character card is going to work. It is that simple. It just lists these 3 items right here you need to pay attention to. This symbol up here just indicates the technique deck that it's attached to this character. That same symbol will be on these cards. And then the bottom, you got your experience, and that really is it. That's the only thing that you're going to have with your character. And when you start the game, you're going to just look right at that card and you're say, okay, when I fight, I can only use, well, the number here with the little fist symbol. That's 3. For most characters, some have 4. One of them has 4. One of them has 2. And then how much chakra do I start with? Well, that's 4, so I'll grab that, and everybody starts with one of these green cubes that's used to track that experience, and then everybody has 3 health. And you can gain more health throughout the course of the game, but everybody starts with 3 health, and that is, kind of a standard for health that people would have. That's how the cards work, and the characters. So let's go to the traps here really quick. So these little blue tokens, and this is the standard type of trap you're going to use when you play the game. If you do want to amp it up and make it a little harder, they do include this little bag of red trap tokens, which will make the traps, each one of those, a little bit harder. So if you do want to use those, you can just sub those out for the blue, or you can do a 50-50. You can do it any way you want to. You can put most blue and a couple reds, and that's the beauty here. You have the option to kind of customize the game, again, on that difficulty. And all you're going to do is just flip these all over so you can't see what's under them, because there are a few different things. Those are called out right in the rule book, and we'll get to that here in a second, of exactly what's under each one of these. You're going to shuffle those up, and then you're going to just place one of those on every one of the areas that doesn't have a number. You're just going to go around the map, and you're just going to fill the map up to where the whole map has these. And the point of that is, as you're moving and kind of traversing around the map, you're going to have to run into those traps. And when you run into those traps, you're going to have to do something with that trap. You're going to have to interact with that trap. And if there's an enemy there, you can't move through enemies. You do have to kind of stop at an enemy and look at those traps. Now, when it gets to fighting an actual enemy set, once enemies are put out on the board and you're kind of at the area where this token is, you don't have to engage in combat. You do have a choice to engage in combat or not engage in combat. You do have a choice to leave an area that does have a revealed, trap or monster or something that you're fighting, but you do have to use 2 action points of movement to get out of that area. And that would be all of your actions for that actual turn of the game. So that's how the traps work. We'll talk about the actions in the game here in a second. We've already hit here. We've got the attack dice. These do have the double ninja star, which is kind of a crit, the double hit. It's got the single ninja star, which is your standard hit. It's got the ninja star with the little power symbol. So the little etched out area there is an actual power symbol, and on the cards you'll see that symbol when you use a card. We'll look at that here in a second. If you roll that symbol, you can execute that extra little ability, so that's kind of a hope I roll it kind of thing. And then our last die is a die that is used by the enemies, and this will be rolled over the course of gameplay to indicate various things that could be happening, because monsters and enemies, they do have various, some of them have passive abilities, some of them have active abilities that will be activated with this actual die. And when you fight it, either when it's defending or attacking, you'll roll this to see if something happens. And if a certain symbol comes up, that action will or will not happen. So that's what this die is going to be used for. There's a couple reference cards here. Now, one thing that I did think was a little strange, and not that it needed to have it, but there was only 2 reference cards included in my game here. So I don't know if that was a mistake, or we could probably check the rule book. I didn't even check that on the components list. If it was a mistake of having just 2, or if that's just the way it comes. I would say that it would have been good to have 5 of these. Just put one in for each one of the characters. That's one thing that I will kind of call out. I think it's helpful for each character to have it. Now, how we did it is we kind of just set, when we played with 4, we just said, okay, here's a reference card and here's a reference card. And, people just kind of looked at it, and that worked perfectly fine. So don't get me wrong, it does work with 2, but that may have been just because of how we were sitting around the table and how our setup was. I would suggest you add one of these for each player. That way the player gets it and can just look here and can see exactly what they need to do. Again, the mechanics of this game are incredibly simplistic, and you'll just kind of follow it like a script, but it would have been nice to have one of these for each one of the players. That's what that is. What we'll find right up here are the little familiar tokens. So there's various different things that will spawn in the game. Per various enemies, they can spawn familiars. That's what these will. They'll get added to the area of where you're fighting the enemy. And you'll sometimes have to clear this before you can beat the enemy. Sometimes it doesn't matter, and you can just kill the enemy and then kill this. So that's how those work. Again, we've already kind of went over these. That's your experience marker. That's your chakra. This is your, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. And this is your life here that you're going to be able to use. And these are your enemy cards. So the enemy cards are going to look much like our boss cards here. And what you're going to do is you're going to shuffle these up when you start the game. And you're always going to have 2 of these out live for each one of the rounds. So round 1 would have 2, and you just, you pull 2, you put those out. And once you got there to this guy and you said, I'm ready to activate combat, you would then flip these over and you could see, and you would set these right here, and you could see what you're up against. Both of these characters need to be defeated to win the round before you run out of time. And that's what this little track right here is for, and that's what these little tokens you're going to use for. You're going to start on this little, what looks like a red kind of cloud side, and that's going to be face up, and you're always going to start on 1. Now, you can start on 0 if you want to make it easier. You can start on 2 if you want to make it a lot harder. Wouldn't recommend starting on 3. That might be impossible, but you can start on 2 to make it a little bit harder, but the standard is you put it on 1, and I would suggest that's definitely where you start. Maybe you want to just put some red traps on there, but I really do think that having that 3 rounds of combat is the right mix. I think for me, making the traps harder, making the enemies harder is a better way to go versus changing the amount of rounds that you have. Because I really do feel like those 3 rounds of combat is fairly critical when you're playing the game, and it gives a really good balance. So it's going to start on 1, and every time you go through a round of actions, which is essentially the players are going to do their thing, there's then going to be a kind of an enemy phase, and then there's going to be sort of a refresh phase where you're going to get a little bit of that chakra back, and you're going to be able to draw back up and kind of get your hand back to where you would have it based on the amount of cards, the technique cards you can hold in your hand. And then you're going to start kind of another round of play. And when you do that, you're going to move that up. Well, if you get past 3 and you haven't defeated these guys, then this token just kind of moves to, whatever round you're on and covers that picture with the red side if you lost. Now, if you were able to defeat both of these guys before the 3 rounds ran up, the round wouldn't be obvious, just automatically over. You would be able to continue to, meditate and gain some things back, or maybe move around and take out a trap. You'd be able to do other things or move closer to where this guy is going next, because they are in numerical order. He will go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. So, if you get these guys beat, you're going to want to hightail to the next area, because let me show you. Here's 1, and then the next place you got to get to defeat within 3 rounds. Once that kind of new session starts, here's 2. So, all of your characters are going to have to traverse through like traps in different areas to get all the way here and still have to beat these guys, because you can't start fighting these guys and taking them out until you're on this spot. And that's the trick of this game, is balancing how do we manage the board. It's really a movement management game. It's not necessarily, because things aren't being added to the board like in a pandemic where you think, okay, I got this area cleared, and then a bunch of stuff happens. It's like, oh man, now it's all filled up again. Or a Cthulhu pandemic is a good example of going through and thinking, oh, I got this whole town clear, but now all of a sudden there's a bunch of stuff added back. It isn't like that. What's there is there, and you're managing what's there. The difficult thing is making sure that you're moving your characters around to be at the right spot at the right time. And sometimes you don't get the beautiful benefit of all characters on that spot at once, all combating that enemy to take them down. Sometimes some characters are not there yet and others are, and you have to just go ahead and initiate that combat and start to tick away at those characters and get some damage done so you can get it done within the 3 rounds. And that's what brings me back to this game time and time again, is that fun that it creates and that somewhat of anxiety of being able to get from point A to point B in the most effective way. Now, if you do win a round, you're just going to flip it over, and on the green side, looks like kind of like a little eye symbol. You're going to put that right over the ring. And then as you go through round to round, these are going to start, building up, and you're going to, I won the first 3, I lost the 4th one, I lost the 5th one, I won the 6th one, lost the 7th one. And that's what that's going to look as you go over the course of gameplay. And then you're going to get to that 9th round, and you're either going to win or lose. The final battle is the 9th round here, and you'll see there isn't a token for that. And there is 9 here on the final area. This is the final area that the boss will travel to, and this is where this is the final showdown. This is where it will happen right here. And that will be the 9th round. And then before you battle those final bosses, and they're right here, and they are the same. There are only 2 here, and it would be nice to see some expansions where maybe they add in some more final bosses. But these bosses go right with the anime and the storyline of this anime, right? It fits perfectly into this board game. They didn't really veer off from the characters or the actual storyline of Naruto. And that's why you do have these particular characters that you're going to battle at the very end. Now, it is nice, they are double-sided, so one side's the normal side, one side is a little bit of a harder side, and then you can indicate what you would like to do when you fight these monsters. So, just give you a quick example here. On this guy here, it shows that X, and that's X is on his heart, his life, and Y is on his defense. And it says X, number of players, so that's going to dictate right there the number of health that monster is going to have. And then Y is the number of victory tokens showing. And they do call these victory tokens, so don't get confused and think, oh, it's my victories. No, the number of victory tokens showing, which we'll say the enemies have won a round, that's what his defense is going to be. So if this is how it would play out, it'd be 1, 2, 3, and this was Y plus 1. So his defense would be 4, which means you do have to roll a 4 or higher to even be able to make a hit. And every time you hit a monster or a beast or familiar, it's always just 1 damage, unless you have a technique card that allows you to add another hit. So it does take quite a bit. You got to kind of just bite away at those enemies as each player is figuring out how they want to take their actions and how they want to attack. So that's how that's going to work when you actually get into combat. Combat is very simple. Basically, you have to meet or exceed their total, and you can do 1 point of damage. So those guys are just set to the side, and they'll be brought out right at the end. I think they could add some maybe expansions down the road to add more of those type of enemies in. Again, to give you a little bit more flavor as you go through the game and you fight some different types of enemies. Here are our technique cards, and this is really the last component outside the rule book. Again, each character does have a stack of 14 cards. Cards are very, very simple. They just simply have some artwork on them, show you how much chakra you're going to need to play that card. You can see right up here, this one takes 3. And here's a good example of one that takes nothing. So you can see that 0 right up there. It just, for this character, it doesn't take anything, expel any type of, energy to be able to use this card, and you can just use it. And here at the bottom of the cards, they all will have this little plus symbol with the fight, and that will show you if you use this card, you automatically get a couple more die. Like some of them give you 1, some of them give you 2, some of them give you nothing. But let's say you were to fight and your character had a base of 3, and I was able to use this card right here. I'd say, well, I get 2 more fight dice. That's good. It's a pretty powerful card. It's called the Cherry Blossom Clash. And it does have an ability as well. And most of them all will have an ability right down here listed. And it's got that little symbol we talked about on the die, that little, here it is right here, kind of a little etched out power symbol. And if you were to roll the dice, and let's just roll these here, I would effectively do with this roll a ton of damage. That was an amazing roll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would basically do a point of damage against pretty much anything in this game with this roll. And then I did roll a couple of those magic symbols. Now, those don't stack up, but you just have to roll at least one of them. And I could have gone to this card and said, oh, what do I get because that happened? Well, it says re-roll any 1 die of your choosing. Well, let's say that I didn't roll so well. I could pick up one of those dice and say, well, I didn't roll good on this one, so I'll roll this one again. Oh, wow, I got a hit. Awesome. And that might have been able to give me enough to match or beat the total of whatever I was going up against. And that's how these technique cards work. They're very simple, very straightforward. That's as easy as it gets. And that's what I like about this game. The rule set is incredibly simplistic. And the mechanics are incredibly simplistic. Where the difficulty of this game comes in is the strategy and the collaboration of how you execute your actions. So let's go right to that, because it's the last main part of what I want to talk through. You know what? We're going to pause. We're actually going to hit the rule book because I don't want to forget this. They did include a beautiful rule book. Nice high color artwork on the front. They've got a great little reference sheet on the back. Maybe this kind of, does a little bit for only including the 2 reference cards here. They did include a nice little reference on the back, and you do have a nice high color book. I mean, look at this. Big text, highly separated, really great color and examples, and the rule set's just laid out. I mean, super simple. Bam, that's the whole game right there. rule set, and then it goes through each one of the actions that can be taken. So very, very simplistic layout on the rule set. The rule book was done very well, and I love a good rule book. Bear loves a good rule book as well. He can't read, but he does love a good rule book. All right, so when we look at the things that we can do in this game, when it's your turn, you got 2 actions and 2 actions only. The actions that are available to you, very simple as well. You can either move, you can meditate, or you can fight. And you can take your 2 actions to do those things in any way that you choose. You can do those in any order. You can do any one of those as many times as you want, up to twice. So you could move twice, meditate twice, fight twice, move, meditate, fight, meditate. Whatever you need to do, you can do. Here's the beauty of how the actions work in this game. It isn't like, okay, on player 1, it's my turn. I will take my 2 actions. It is now player's 2 turn. They will take their 2 actions. Player 3, player 4, player 5, so on and so on around the board until everyone's taken their 2 actions. And then you would collaborate and think, well, I'll do this, and then you do that and this, and then you're right. And that would be great, but they took it one step further with this, and they said, you know what? Of all the actions that can be taken, and with a 4-player game, 2 times 4, you got 8 actions that are being taken. Those 8 actions can be taken in any order by any player. And that's the part of this game that I love, is you really are thinking through each one of these battles. And this is why I think it goes beyond that 60-minute time, or it did for us. And maybe we got a little bit too into the analysis paralysis or the tactical nature of every battle. Because I would call this game much more tactical versus strategic. The only strategy that I see really in this game is strategically position yourself around the board, getting from spot to spot to spot. But the battles are very, very tactical in nature. You just want to win that particular instance isolated in that battle. And having all of those actions to be able to utilize across the player base was great, because it was like, you know what, I'm going to take my action number 1, and I'm going to, and maybe I have a technique card that allows me to heal. And I'm going to heal everybody before this fight. And then I'm going to hold my second action. And then, hey, player 3, you take 2 fight actions because you do a lot of damage and you're right in the midst of that battle. So you just go ahead and take both of your actions and fight for both of them and just waylay. Just do some damage on whatever we're going after. And then character 2, you go ahead and take your first action to do whatever. Hey, character 1, I'm going to come back to me. I'm going to take my second action to meditate, get to know them chakras. That's what happens when you meditate. You're able to take one more of these. And again, you need these to be able to utilize your technique cards. So you might even want to meditate before you take your second action, which gives you enough chakra to be able to use a technique card. And then we're now left to, let's say, player number 4, who may have both of their actions left. And the enemies may be dead, and that player may use both of their actions to hightail it to the next area of wherever the enemy is going for the whole next battle round. Now, when you move, you have the choice of moving 1 or 2 spots for 1 action, and that is your choice. If you do run into something, you do have to stop and interact with that. It will stop movement. But for 2 movements, you can move 1, 2 for 1, 3, 4 for 2. So you can move 4 spots for 2 actions. So that may allow a character to kind of start to hightail it off to another area of the board if everybody just finished off the battle. So that's kind of how a round would play out, and it really is that simple. And that's as much as I'm really going to go through when it comes to gameplay, because the game really is that simplistic. And that's what I like about cooperative games that are board management or hand management. You got to keep them simple, but you got to design the mechanics in a way that allows you to focus on the strategy and the tactics of what's in front of you, and not so much on all the little nitpick rules of you can do this and you can do that, or you can do, there's 10 different ways to do X, Y, and Z. Now, if it's an adventure game, it's a character development game, absolutely, right? You do have some experience in this, but it's very simplistic, right? Every time you beat something, you get an experience point. That's how it works. It's that simple. You defeat one of these monsters, boom, you get an experience point. You defeat a trap, you don't get an experience point, but you defeat a monster, if you're the one that makes the crushing blow, you get an experience point. And that's another thing you're going to want to work out, because, again, when you fight these monsters, it's not like you just roll and you're like, oh, I got 8 damage, and this guy's only got 4 health, he's dead. No, you did 1 damage because you were able to meet or exceed his defense. So, you're going to kind of pick away at these enemies, And it's the person that makes that final blow, and you will want to think that through as well. Like, hey, player 3, you do a ton of damage. Waylay on this thing, but not too much. Let me come in and use one of my actions to make that final blow, make that final kill, because I need more experience to get to something on my card that gives me some type of buff that'll be better for the overall group. So you're balancing that as well as you're playing. The only other thing that I'll say is when it comes to enemies damaging a character, there are technique cards that allow you to get out of a damage when it's the enemy's turn. There is no dice the enemy's going to roll to say, you may roll this die, right, to determine if there's some kind of ability that happens when it's an enemy's turn. But the enemy's not going to roll attack dice against you, and then you're going to defend against it. That's generally never going to happen. There might be a situation in like technique versus different, like certain type of enemy you're fighting that might play out something like that. But generally, it's just going to be if you're in a spot with an enemy, every enemy gets to assign 1 damage to the group. And that damage can be assigned in any way the group sees fit. So, there may be a character that only has 1 health left, and you say, you know what, we got a character that's fully amped up, so you take the damage. When you do lose all your health, you do become something called paralyzed. So it's paralysis in this game. You do become a bit paralyzed, and you can't take really any actions. You can't really do much. You can't really do anything. So you do have to get brought back out of that paralysis, and there are various different technique cards that can do that can bring you back up. And that is something that you do want to do pretty quickly. So if no one has one of those, like, hey, get someone out of paralysis card, when it's your turn to sort of refresh, which is that final phase in a turn, you will want to, because you can discard what you have in your hand and draw back up. Everybody just might want to dump their hand and discard and draw back up to whatever they can have to be able to try to get a remove paralysis card, because that really can make a big difference in this type of game. Because it does scale on how many players are in the game, especially when you get to the final battle on the boss, and you don't want people dropping in paralysis because you've lost those actions, and every single action is incredibly critical, especially when you're just picking 1 health away at a time from anything that you're fighting. And even some of these traps, they have 1. I think pretty much every trap has 1 health. I believe every single. Now, when you get into these reds, that might change. I haven't looked at them all, but every one of these have 1 health, but they'll have like 2 defense. 3, this one had 3 defense. You do again have to meet or exceed that when you roll. So that's not always as easy as it looks. I'm rolling really well. I mean, there was a 3 and a magic, or an ability activation there. I'm rolling really, really well today. Didn't roll so well when I played with my group, and it got fairly comical until it wasn't funny that we were getting beat up in some of the battles, but we ultimately did win the game, and we did win most of our rounds, which I think made a big difference when we got to the final boss there. That is Naruto Shippuden, and it is a great game. I do highly recommend this game as a group cooperative game. Again, it is a lot of fun to play solo as well. But I'll tell you, it is more fun to play cooperatively. So let's talk about that just for a second here, because a lot of these cooperative games can be played solo. I would probably say any co-op game can be played solo, whether they're advertised that way or not. There are some mechanics sometimes where, like, hey, for the balance of the game, you're not supposed to show every player all your cards. And you just have to kind of ignore that rule, I guess. But with this particular game, I would say it definitely can be played from a solo perspective because all cards are available and revealed at all times. But this game is more fun cooperatively because you really are balancing that thought with each character around what should we do in this situation. And everybody kind of weighing in and saying, well, you should take your first action and then your second action. Let me take my first action, and then you guys take your actions and I'll take my last action last. And that's a lot of fun to kind of go through the balance of that and have that discussion, and then sort of as a group do your plan and see how it works out. And again, if things don't go the way you think it's going to, you don't have to stick to that. You can kind of pivot if you still have the actions left as you're going through and you're playing. But that's a lot of fun, and I do I do highly recommend that you play that way. You do get a group and you play this game with a group, and it is a ton of fun. So this one comes with a high recommendation. I know it's probably not a well-known game by any means. I have not seen it out there on the hotness list or anything on BGG, but this is a great game. If you see this game, it does come at a fairly low price point as well. Pick it up if you come across it. So hit that like, click the subscribe below to join the team, ring the bell. This has been the McGuire Review, and we'll see you next time. Naruto